You don't give them all the tools. It's very different. It's, again, the action is not meeting up with the rhetoric.
You get the quick report.
Okay.
No, okay. All right, then I've got, first audience question, and it's directed to Andrew. Why do the Democratic candidates for president seem to be reluctant to use the term Islamofascism? Don't they realize that Islamic fascists are the enemies of both Israel and the U.S., or are they simply being politically correct?
I think part of it has to do with the fact that there's been efforts by neoconservatives to control the language in this country. And I'll give you a couple of examples in other areas. Changing the estate tax to the death tax. There are examples in terms of being, quote, with regards to the immigration debate is another example. There is a very strong record on the Democratic side in terms of standing up to these particular groups, such as Al Qaeda, the mullahs in Iran, the Taliban, etc. And as a matter of fact, even more consistency. I don't know if you saw this morning's news, but Pakistan, our best ally in the world, just entered into an agreement with Iran to share natural gas. Where's been the United States? Where has this administration been in standing up and making sure that Pakistan is consistent on its policy with regards to taking on Al Qaeda in its own country? But that being said, this is a question of terminology. And when you speak with different groups, there are different terms you use, and they don't feel comfortable letting the Republicans control the debate with these particular words. It doesn't mean that they're not for better homeland security. As I mentioned, this Congress has been much better on homeland security than any of the previous Congresses. Same with standing up to Iran, standing up to Syria, etc. But because Democrats believe in being an inclusive as opposed to a divisive approach, they don't like to use the divisive Republican words. Again, this is the same thing we talked about from the very beginning. Words are one thing, actions are another. Democratic actions speak much louder.
So the question was about the rhetoric and labeling the enemy radical Islam or Islamofascism. So let me give you some examples of Republican position statements. Mike Huckabee, former Arkansas governor: "We value life, and it's what separates us from the Islamic jihadists who are out to kill us." Former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani: "The Democrats couldn't even utter the word Islamic terrorism. It's our biggest enemy. They can't utter the term." And in fact, there have been 9 or 10 Democratic debates. I've not heard neither the words radical Islam or jihad, nor a discussion, a serious discussion about it. Because ultimately, the only people who can finally defeat these radical Islamic jihadists are the Muslims themselves. Governor Romney's statement. "It's a global war. Islamic fanaticism has declared it upon us." Former Tennessee Senator Fred Thompson. "I understand and appreciate the enormity of the challenge we face from radical Islamic extremism." Arizona Senator John McCain. I am surprised at 2 things that you said in your last answer. The first was the use of the term neoconservative, which is, of course, a pejorative now from the left and many anti-Semites and anti-Zionists on all the liberal blogs. I would recommend and request that much care is given to the use of the label as an epithet, neoconservative, because I'd say probably a huge chunk of people in this room are neoconservatives. Secondly, you talked about Democrats confronting Syria and Iran. Well, no. Speaker Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, went to Syria. Now, she did 2 things that were really, really not good. The first was she made up and misrepresented Israel's position regarding the Golan Heights, compromising Israel's strategic security. So much so that the Prime Minister of Israel rebuked her. Now, when she came back, a lot of Jewish Democratic congressmen went all over the Jewish press in America and tried to spin the story, and the Republicans set her up. No, this was her sentiment. She called him His Excellency, and what was the second big problem, besides really messing up Israeli-Syrian relations and basically saying Israel's happy to give up the Golan Heights? Syrian women, reformers, and dissidents cried out and claimed that they were left in the lurch after Mrs. Pelosi's trip. and that when Democrats, and Kucinich, by the way, followed her trip, Congressman Lantos unfortunately went. He's been given a hard time for it as well. Some Republicans have gone to Syria, by the way, including Darrell Issa, who you mentioned, but always with State Department approval and have never violated the policies and positions of the United States, and never as Speaker of the House, and never, as Tom Lantos indicated, there's a new day in Washington and a new democratic foreign policy. No, we have one foreign policy at a time in this country. Similarly, regarding Iran, when Edwards and Obama and others make the statement that they'll be happy to negotiate and discuss with terrorists and dictators and tyrants around the world, that leaves in the lurch. It's a very tough moment for the reformers and the students and others on the streets of Iran who are looking for a signal from the United States that we are not going to have peace talks and negotiations with Ahmadinejad. The President of the United States needs to have, as part of his foreign policy, the ability to pick and choose who he's going to dignify with negotiations with the Commander-in-Chief of the United States and the leader of the free world, and who he's not going to talk to. The Democrats may have their own foreign policy, but it's not good for Israel, and it's not good for liberty.
You know, I wish we heard this much from the Republicans when Helen Delitzsch Bentley was meeting with the Serbians during the Yugoslavian conflict, but obviously it's selectively applied. Henry Waxman, when he came back, and he was on that delegation trip to Syria, came back and spoke in front of Democrats for Israel and presented a very different picture of what happened versus what you've heard here today. And I would, in which he explained that there had been discussions back and forth, and that there was some sort of interest. There had been interest from the Israelis in talking with the Syrians. If any of you read any of the Israeli newspapers as much as I do, there are frequent headlines and discussions back and forth that Israel wants to talk with Syria and has wanted to talk to Syria for some time about the Golan Heights. But it has been this administration that has held threats of withholding housing guarantees if they dare talk to Syria. George Bush has at times put the agenda of Washington ahead of the agenda of Israel. Now, if there's nothing there between Syria and Israel, and there may not be, then that's between the Israelis and the Syrians. But to have our president dictate to the Prime Minister of Israel that he cannot talk, and then, as I understand it, and then also tried to interfere with American policy as well. For those of you who remember when Ehud Olmert came to speak in front of AIPAC, the administration asked them to talk about Iraq, not about the threats to Israel. It's very inappropriate. You know, for years, and I'm going to use the term, these group of neoconservatives, because when I was growing up, and when my father was growing up supporting Barry Goldwater back in 1964, being a conservative meant you were fiscally conservative, and you were careful about how and where you threw your might around the world. These neoconservatives seem to have lost touch with that. The people who are some of the leading neoconservatives, Potthurst and Daniel Pipes, they come from a long line of scholars. Both of their parents were very involved in fighting the Russians and the Soviets, and they believed in using proxies to fight the Russians in various places, in the Vietnam, in Afghanistan, and in these other places. However, what you're seeing now for the neoconservatives, an attempt to, through the bullying of Olmert, is an attempt to basically use Israel as a proxy against these countries, instead of letting Israel, if they want to find peace with their neighbors, that's a decision for Israel to make, not for George Bush and, at the time, Paul Wolfowitz to make.
To Larry, why hasn't the Republican Jewish Coalition and the present candidates for president publicly criticized Condoleezza Rice and President Bush for pressuring Israel to make concessions to the Palestinians and for putting so much emphasis on a Palestinian state? Is it true that among the Republican candidates, the only candidate who has unconditionally come out against a Palestinian state under all circumstances is Duncan Hunter, who is running very low? And do you support what the administration is doing with regard to Annapolis?